Welcome back to the Starting Over Stronger show. I am excited today to have a conversation with Sandy Kirkham. She is the author of a book titled Let Me Prey Upon You, and she is a survivor of a minister's sexual abuse from when she was a teenager. And her book is her story and her calling to share with others about the damage that is done, and so much depth here. It's just incredible. She's spoken on councils and before the Ohio Senate in a Maryland court. She's appeared on a local television show in Boston, and her story, Stolen Innocence, was told in a documentary produced by the Hope of Survivors. She is actively working with survivors to conduct victim support conferences and to participate in panels to share her perspective on this subject. So if you have this experience in your past, or maybe you're involved in a church today that you believe is victimizing you or re-victimizing you because of a situation in your past or present, you're going to get a lot out of today's story. And I want to say I don't often do trigger warnings because there's, we cover a lot of really deep stuff on this show all the time. So I feel like I'd have to do one for every single show. But especially today, I guess I do want to let you know going into it that we are going to be talking about sexual abuse by someone in church leadership. And there's a little bit of detail that's going to come out during the story. And I want to make sure that you're aware of that so you're prepared for it if that is something that you feel might trigger you. If not, then I hope you will join us, and I know you'll get a lot out of Sandy's story. Stay tuned.
Welcome to the Starting Over Stronger show, where you'll find help and hope for your divorce survival and recovery. Divorce well, live well.
Today we have a special guest named Sandy Kirkham, and she is here to tell her story and talk about her book. So thank you for being here today on the show.
Well, thank you. I'm glad to have the opportunity.
Yeah. Well, tell us a little bit about who Sandy is and what you have to share with us about your life and this book that you have written.
I'm Sandy Phillips Kirkham. I live in Cincinnati, Ohio, lived here all my life. I'm married with two lovely children and two perfect granddaughters. And two fairly my dogs are fairly well behaved, I should say. I'm a nurse, registered nurse. I've been retired for a few years, and I enjoy life. My story is one of clergy abuse at the age of 16, and I wrote a book called Let Me Prey Upon You that details not only the abuse, but the aftermath and the trauma that was caused for the next 27 years of my life before I was able to talk about it. I spent 27 years keeping it a secret.
Wow.
And
Okay.
It was a trigger that forced me to kind of deal with my past. And then I began sharing my story, and it came to a point that I thought my story was important enough and powerful enough that I should really write a book. And that's why the reason I wrote the book.
Right. Okay. Well, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for your courage and sharing that through your book and here with me today. And I'm excited. I've read just pieces and parts of it so far, and I'm definitely looking forward to reading the entire thing at some point as well. But I want to just, have a conversation today here with our listeners because I want them to know what they can do if they're faced with or, currently facing an abuse situation by someone in church leadership, even if that abuse isn't sexual, if it's being downplayed or perpetuated by someone in a church leadership position, that then becomes spiritual abuse because we believe we should do certain things because God, and we put words in God's mouth, and I could get on a soapbox, but we will start with, I just have to wonder, I considered, as I was reading your book, whether or not you ever thought about writing under a pseudonym, or if you used actual names or not, and how those kinds of decisions were made.
I decided to tell my story with my own name, and I did change a few of the names. I changed the name of the church where this occurred because they were eventually willing to let me come back and have a meeting with them. And graciously, I wanted the truth to be known, and they were willing to let me come and tell that truth. And I also knew that this happened in 1972, 73, 74, 75, 76. It went on for 5 years. Wow. And so it happened so long ago that I knew that if anyone were to Google that church now, if I used their name, then it could pop up again. And I didn't think that stain necessarily belonged on them all that time. So I did change the name of the church. I also did not use his name, and I did that for a couple of reasons. When I first started talking about my abuse, I wanted my story to be heard. And I was so afraid that if I used his name, people would see me as looking for revenge, or that I had a hateful purpose. I wanted to be able to tell my story without someone questioning my motives. And so I thought the best way to do that was not to use his name. I also didn't use his name because I have since reconnected with his ex-wife, and they have 3 children together. And she had asked me if I would not use his name. And I felt that she had been, if you read the book, you'll see she'd been through enough pain. And this had, of course, caused great pain to his children. And I didn't feel by adding to that was worthy of what I wanted to do. And so I've been probably criticized for not using his name, that I'm somehow protecting him. But again, if you read the book, you will see that I exposed him to his church leaders. I went to his denominational leaders. I wrote letters to any of the churches that he continued to preach in. So it wasn't as if I was hiding him completely. But I think for the book, I decided that I would not use his name.
Yeah. And that makes a lot of sense, that it could look like a personal vendetta or something if you were to use his name. And so thank you for sharing that. That was just kind of a personal curiosity of mine as I began to read it. And I want everyone that's listening to pick up a copy of your book. And it is called Let Me Prey Upon You, Breaking Free from a Minister's Sexual Abuse. And I want them to hear your whole story, because I, for one, am just amazed at the level of detail of your story and your ability to recall things that must have happened, 45, 50 years ago?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I guess tell me how that is. How did you keep records? Do you just have an excellent memory?
Well, the older I get, the less my memory is accurate. However, I'm a hoarder, so I kept lots of the church newsletters. I kept all kinds of information on things. But the thing about trauma, you don't forget certain things, no matter how many years go by. And so there were things that, to this moment, if I were to recall them, I can recall detail, the smell in the room, the people in the room at the time, or whatever the situation is. Victims can recall with much clarity things that happened to them in a traumatic way. So that's one thing. The other thing is, when I kept this secret for 27 years, that forced me to continually remember the past, because every time I had a trigger, I had to figure out how to stop that trigger factor. And so I was constantly remembering him and the situation because I was holding it all in. And I found that controlling the secret wasn't really what I was doing. The secret was controlling me. And so to remember details was fairly easy. Now, to write them down and to share those personal details, that was more difficult. I'm not sure what sections of the book you had read, but there's some very personal things that happened that I describe in the book, and things that he had done to me. And I remember watching the movie Spotlight. I don't know if you know that movie, but it's the movie of the clergy abuse in the Catholic Church. It won an Academy Award. It's called Spotlight. Highly recommend it. At any rate, one of the reporters from the Boston Globe was interviewing an abuse victim, and he continually said, I was abused by a priest. I was abused. And she looked at him and she said, I need details, because abuse in general doesn't really describe what was done to you. And so when I was writing the book, I kind of remembered that and thought, I can't just say that I was sexually abused. It won't paint enough clear of a picture for my readers to understand the trauma and the physical abuse and the emotional abuse that this man put upon me.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure that was not easy. And, it's interesting. I think trauma does different things to different people because certainly it sounds like your experience was that you remembered every detail and others, seem to block out a lot,
Right.
Whole sections and
Yes.
time periods of their life. So, you just never know what the brain is going to do to try to protect you. But today I wondered if you'd just start by just telling us the short version of this part of your story, what transpired, how it resolved, and what you would like others to get out of reading your book or hearing your story.
Well, first, I think it's important to describe where I was in my church life and spiritually. I started attending church when I was 8. My parents did not attend church. And so I went with a neighbor up the street and I fell in love with church. I loved going to church camp, Bible school, everything about it I loved. As I got older, I began to teach Sunday school. I sang in the choir. I was baptized when I was 13. My faith was really growing and I was just happy to be a part of the church. After I turned 16, our church had a youth pastor, and he was different than any other pastor we'd ever seen. He was charismatic. He had dynamic sermons. He was 30 and married with 2 children, but he really acted more like the kids. He drove a convertible. He wore cutoff jeans. He had sideburns. So like in the 70s, you would call him hip. And everyone loved this man. He was treated like a rock star. So when he would ask people to do something for him, they felt honored. And because I was so active in the church when he arrived, it was to no one's surprise that he tapped into me to be one of the leaders. And so he continually told me how much he needed me in the ministry and how grateful he was that I was helping in the church. And it was one night at a youth group meeting at my house. He waited for everyone to leave. And then he stopped me in my hallway, began telling me how wonderful I was and how appreciative was of me. And of course, I'm thrilled. I like the attention. And he all of a sudden just bent down and he kissed me. And I kind of remember thinking, I think he just kissed me, but this is the pastor. He wouldn't be doing anything he shouldn't be doing. And maybe it's just his way of showing appreciation. I didn't know how to process it. So I just kind of accepted it and let it go. I babysat for his family. She worked evenings. So that's kind of gave him the perfect opportunity to be alone with me 4 or 5 times a week. We would sit and talk about the Bible. He would give me books to read on spirituality, really tapping into my trust in him as my pastor. And so the kissing and the hugging would continue. And sometimes it came a little more than just a simple kiss, but that's the way that continued for a year. That was the grooming process. He was gaining my trust even more. Certainly, again, I was the attention I liked, but it was just kissing. So I didn't think anything of it. I let it go until one night he took me into the living room. He put me on the floor. He began undressing me. And I was absolutely stunned and I froze. I was frozen. I didn't know what to do. I just laid there. And he eventually took me upstairs where he had sex with me. And from that point on, I knew this was wrong. And I also knew that it was something we shouldn't be doing. But he then reminded me that no one can ever find out. If I did tell anyone, they weren't going to believe me. And if I did tell anyone and they believed me, I would be responsible for the ruination of his ministry. And of course, this church loved him. And I just felt that I had to keep this secret. And so that's what I did. As the relationship continued, he became violent. The sex became more deviant. It was not a caring, loving relationship in any way. And I just felt trapped. I felt like I was in a black hole with no way out. And I felt like I could tell no one. And this abuse went on for 5 years. Early on, I tried to get out of the relationship, but he would always go back to, you need to stay with me, and this is God's will. We're married in God's eyes. This is what you are meant to do. And of course, again, at being 16, 17 years old, I'm in this confusing state. And again, I didn't know what to do with it. I didn't know I could tell anyone, so I had to accept that it was the way it was. So after a while, I just accepted the relationship, and I didn't even make any attempt to get out of it. And I knew it would only be over when he said it was over. He was caught. A couple of the people in the church became suspicious of his behavior, followed him one night and found us. And he was called in to the elders. I was not. I don't know what he told them. I don't know what questions he was asked. I was never asked any questions. I was simply told where I was to sit in church, how I was to behave. If someone asked me a question, I was to direct it to them. I was not to tell anyone, including my parents. All this was an effort to keep it a secret and move him to the next church, which they eventually did. Shortly after he was moved to the next church, I was called in by the elders and told, because of my behavior, I was to leave the church. I was devastated. It was the only church I knew, and I loved that church. And I believed that they forgave him, that why couldn't I be forgiven? But I wasn't. I was told to leave the church. And that probably affected me more, the response of that church in many ways. It certainly affected my spiritual life many years later than the actual abuse did. And that was the end. And I never went back to church. And I floundered for a few years, and then I met my husband. And so that's kind of it in a nutshell.
Okay. Wow. That's a lot. Thank you again for sharing. I can't even imagine how much that had to have altered your life, your mind, the course of your life. It sounds like you were blessed to find someone amazing to marry, and you built a family and overcame. But even so, it could not have been easy.
And I did. I mean, on the outside, my life was perfect, and it was in many, many ways. It was perfect. I had 2 great kids. I had a wonderful husband. But when you're carrying a deep, dark secret like that, it takes away some of the joy that you're sharing in that life that you're supposed to have. And it's exhausting, because I always worried someone would find out, someone would, I felt like I was this imposter, that people saw me one way, but in my mind, if they really knew who I was, I'd had an affair with a married man who was my pastor, and I'd been kicked out of a church, and my spiritual life was non-existent. I was someone who read my Bible every day. I loved going to church. Now, church was a place of conflict and pain for me. It was no longer a place of joy. And I had this disconnect with God that I didn't want to have, but I didn't know how to fix it. It was a difficult 27 years to have to live my life that way. And keeping something secret from your husband, that's never a good thing. It's not a good thing. And so, yes, it was, I appeared to be okay. And I was in many ways, but in a lot of ways I was not. I was suffering.
Right. Well, on some level, although not that deep of a level, I can imagine, the story that you're telling is a story of betrayal and pain from one of the places on this earth that we should feel the most safe. And in your book on page 43, you had a quote from Diane Langberg that says, whenever power is used in a way that wounds the vulnerable or that exploits trust, abuse has occurred. And I think by that definition, which I totally agree with, I definitely have faced what you have on a different level. And in previous episodes of the Starting Over Stronger show, we have talked about the damage that can be done by insidious people inside of churches. And I've spoken of spiritual abuse that I myself have endured. And I have had more than one guest on the show tell their story of leaving a toxic or abusive marriage in which their church in some way facilitated or perpetuated the emotional, verbal, psychological, or financial abuse that was going on. And I can't really say for sure that there aren't good churches out there. It's just never been my experience. And so I was actually recently asked what church I attend, and I sat and thought of it for a while as others around the room shared where they went. And I finally arrived at saying, I'm currently attending the smallest church that I ever have. It's in my living room. It's just me and God. It's going very well. Yeah. I do occasionally have squabbles with other members in the church, but we always resolve them well. And in all seriousness, I truly feel closer to God than I ever have. And I continue to pray and seek him in my everyday life. And he and I, in fact, have spoken a lot about this, in fact, because he's the reason that I am as vocal as I am about the damage that some churches are doing, either intentionally or not, because I myself have had 3 incidents in this life-altering and devastating way, like you have described. And without getting into the details of that, there was a lot of unlearning and unbrainwashing that had to happen in those, in all of those situations. And going back to church at all became difficult and at times impossible. And so there's a lot that goes into that. But I have to wonder, you said I think in agreement with what I'm sharing here, that on the back of your book, you mentioned tragically, church can become a great place of harm, or a place of great harm, I mean. And elsewhere in your book, you shared an anonymous quote that I think sums it up well. The saddest thing about betrayal is that it never comes from your enemies. Mm-hmm. Betrayal is betrayal, whether it's sexual, emotional, spiritual.
Is your divorce feeling like an uphill battle? Maybe you've put off filing, even though you know that's what needs to happen because you're afraid of how you're going to make it work. Do you struggle with knowing you need more help than what you're getting, but feeling stuck because you don't think you can afford to get the help you need? What if I told you that you can't afford not to? As a certified divorce and life transition coach, my private coaching clients were asking themselves all of these same questions, and they're now finding clarity and confidence through the one-on-one support with someone who's been there and on the road to recovery for over a decade. And better yet, they're saving time, stress, and money on their divorce. In your 6-month private coaching program, you will get at least 2 full 1-hour sessions per month by phone or Zoom. We can even meet in person for Kansas City local clients who wish or when there's a need. You also have unlimited access to text and email me with urgent concerns. This is everyone's favorite service because we all know divorce doesn't happen from 9 to 5 Monday through Friday. You will also get access to an e-drive full of personal development tools and worksheets on boundaries, personal responsibility, taking the high road, conflict resolution, life assessment, and much more. And you'll love my free app, which includes the names, phone numbers, and email addresses of every divorce professional and home expert that I know, like, and trust. You no longer have to worry about who you can trust to help you as you make decisions and changes throughout your divorce. Simply go to startingoverstronger.com and book a free discovery call. I look forward to meeting you, understanding your concerns, and sharing how coaching will help.
So talk to us a little bit about where you are now spiritually after everything that you went through.
Well, I'm kind of in the same camp that you're in. I still have difficulty with church. I did attend church through those years because I wanted my children to have that experience. And again, I didn't see it as abuse at the time. At those 27 years, I really did see is that I had cooperated, I consented to this affair with a married man. So for me, I did not recognize it abuse until I had that trigger factor, which I describe in the first chapter of my book. And it was then that I became enlightened, that I thought, no, this was not right. What he did to me was abuse. So for 27 years, when I would attend church, I blocked everything out. When the prayer started, I'd go over my grocery list. I didn't listen to any prayers. I never closed my eyes. I walked past a minister's office every Sunday morning and got a knot in my stomach for 27 years. And that's just how I functioned. I just knew, okay, I'm going to see this office and I'm going to get a knot and then it'll be gone. So that's how I was for that 27 years. And then once I was able to understand what was done to me, I recognized this was not something that God participated in. In fact, he was just as angry about what was done to me as I was. And he talks about the wolves in sheep's clothing. He talks about beware of those who come as ravenous wolves. And that's what these men and sometimes women are. They are wolves in sheep's clothing. They are pretending to be someone who cares about you in order to trap you, in order to devour you. And so once I recognized that this was not something that God participated in, but I don't have the same trust. I think there's a lack. I'm a little more, I say red flags when I'm around church or around anyone who is professing to be a clergy person. That's not to mean I distrust them completely. I'm just not as trusting. I don't trust as much as I used to. And I think that's a normal reaction. And I think God understands that. I once had a victim say to me, well, what if you don't believe in God anymore? She was abused by a priest. And I said to her, that's okay. I think God is a big enough God, and he understands what was done to you, and he gets it. And that's okay. I believe that. Her trauma was so great that's where it landed her. And I think God gets that. So spiritually, I think I'm in a good place. I do read the Bible again, but I will not allow anyone to say to me, well, the Bible says.
Yes.
That's a trigger for me. I mean, I just put my back up against the wall. Don't tell me what you think the Bible says, because that's how he, was able to abuse me for so long. He continually told me this is what the Bible says. And that the Bible says we're married in God's eyes. No, that wasn't in the Bible.
Yeah.
But so that's kind of, I think if that answers your question a little bit about where I am. But there are deep spiritual wounds that occur when you've been abused by clergy. The church becomes contaminated for you. It just becomes a place that is a reminder of all that happened. At least for me, it was a reminder.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I think, church is a very loaded word for me. And I know a lot of wonderful Christian people. And I don't know if I'll ever go back to church. I just know that I'm actively working on my relationship with God always. And I'm just learning very slowly. I think it takes years to reframe everything that has happened in 3 different traumatic church experiences in my life, just to kind of acclimate that with what I know of good Christian people. And it's a lot to unpack. And I also know that many people who are wounded in the church do blame God and never return to organized religion per se, and maybe never again believe in God. And I've never felt that. I have always, as you said, and I was touched when you said that, you never saw that God was the one to blame for any of this. You thought if this is hurting me, it must be hurting my God. And I feel I've said the exact same thing many times. It has to grieve his heart because I know that's not what he intended for his people. And so one of the most important things, or things that touched me the most in your book, was in the epilogue about using his name. You said that your story shows how a charismatic leader in a church full of such people can thwart the word of God and create massive harm. And you also referred to how church elders hide and I'll add anyway, sometimes will minimize the sinful actions of others to save the perpetrators or the pastors themselves' reputations while removing the victims completely, which was your situation. Or I would say even leaving them feeling ostracized from the church or uncomfortable staying, even if they wanted to or could. And you also stated, and I agree, that they deserve to be outed. It's not about revenge. It's not about a personal vendetta. For me, it's just about complete authenticity and transparency being the right thing to do. And in your case, you stated that some of these people were no longer living, so you saw no benefit to visiting the sins of the fathers and the children. And I just think that shows an incredible amount of wisdom and grace on your part. But I also think what's important about these statements is that whether the abuse was like yours, sexual in nature, or whether it was more along the lines of what myself and many of my listeners have encountered with patriarchal distortions of the word of God, where emotional, verbal, and financial abuse are occurring and being swept under the rug. It's basically re-victimizing victims by telling them that they're not really victims, or that they just need to pray more or be more submissive, or that it's somehow their own fault.
Forgiveness, they need to forgive. That's the other.
That's the big thing to me. That's kind of where I'm leading up to, is forgiveness was used as a weapon on myself and my family when something came to light, and we were chastised for not being more forgiving. Right. Because we didn't agree with sweeping sin under the rug because of the devastation to the victim. And as I said, it's just simply not right for it to be handled that way. And so it's no wonder that some people leave churches and never return,
No victim, and I agree with you, emotional abuse, because his emotional abuse to me probably had more damage than the actual sexual abuse itself. The things he would say to me and the gaslighting that he used on me really did stay with me for the rest of my life. I was never pretty enough. I was never smart enough. I was, all of these things that he kept telling me that I wasn't. And, it took me, like you said, years to unravel. But no victim should ever be told to forgive, and no victim should ever be told how they should tell their story and what they want to say into their story. It's our story to tell. And forgiveness does not mean silence. I've had some people say to me, well, I don't know that you have really forgiven because you keep talking about this. Well, forgiveness does not equal silence. To me, forgiveness was unburdening myself from this past and this abuser. It was saying, I'm going to let go and let God take this over, because I want to live the life that I was meant to live. And I can't live that life as long as I'm harboring hate. And for 2 years, I hated this man. I could not get him out of my mind. And it wasn't until I said, okay, I'm going to just let him go and let this go, because I don't want him in my life anymore. I want to live the life I was meant to live. Now, that wasn't easy, and I still have moments when it comes back to me. But And that doesn't work for everyone. I have a very dear friend, and he was abused by a priest. And he has said, I will never forgive. I will hate that man to the day I die. That's his story. That's his journey. And I don't have a right or a place to say to him, no, that's not helpful. And maybe it's not, but it's not my place. He needs to come to that decision on his own. I do tell victims that, I mean, for 27 years, I lived with guilt and shame, and that was crippling. And then after I acknowledged the abuse, I lived with hatred for that time. And that was just as crippling. So it wasn't working for me. And that's how I finally came. I could wake up every morning and hate this man. Mm-hmm. Do you think he wakes up every morning thinking of me? No. So I was giving away my life and my time to him by thinking about him and having this hatred in my heart. So that worked for me. It doesn't work for everyone. But I also think it helps victims to know that whatever was done to you was not your fault. It took me a long time to keep from saying to myself more than once, yeah, well, it sort of was my fault because I didn't do this, or I should have said this, or I should have said no, or why didn't I do this? Absolutely not. I responded in the way, as most victims do, with the coping skills that I had at the time and the vulnerability where I was at that time. I was in an emotional, vulnerable state. I was a young teenage girl. So my coping skills were lacking in the ability to say no to this man who I looked up to, who had the last year been a great friend to me, had shown that he cared for me. And now I was supposed to stand up to him and say no. It wasn't in my capabilities to be able to do that. So victims need to understand whatever was done to you was not your fault. You were targeted. You were chosen for your vulnerabilities. You were chosen because he knew that he could get to you for whatever reason. And you need to understand that.
Yeah, it is just unfortunate because I do, like I said, I do truly believe that there are good people in churches, and certainly good things are happening in churches. But there are also, like you said, wolves in sheep's clothing. There are people who are using the church and the teachings of the Bible to exploit other people in myriad ways. And, it's often reaping lifelong damage. And the thing about forgiveness is that it's just part of a process. Right. And that process begins with acknowledgement and, if possible, amends. And so to be telling somebody that they should be forgiving when there's been no acknowledgement, there's been no restitution, there's been no amends, there's been, nothing.
Other than a weak apology of I'm sorry. That's usually all you get.
Yeah.
If that. Yeah.
And honestly, truly, even if with that and with the course of time that often is required, forgiveness is just acceptance. It's not, you're not saying that it was okay. You're just saying it happened. And for whatever reason it happened, I can't change it. I can only just learn from it. I can look back and go, because that happened, I am here. This is who I am. I have this new strength or this new wisdom, or I can do something with this terrible thing that never should have happened. And I think that's really where a lot of people get lost in the weeds on forgiveness, of just feeling like they're saying it's okay. And of course you're not. It's not.
And for me, the other thing I think for me was I kept thinking if I say that I forgive him, I was being unfaithful to my pain. I was almost saying, oh, I forgive him. It's okay. It's over. It didn't matter. When in reality, that pain was still there. And so I had to come to a point where I realized that didn't mean that I still didn't recognize the pain and the damage done. It didn't mean, like you said, that it was okay or no big deal. Mm-hmm. It was a big deal. But I am at a place where I feel at peace. I've made peace with my past.
Yeah. And, I have to say, the person or persons who say to you that maybe you haven't forgiven because you keep talking about it, just that to me, just instantly when you said that, that's somebody that is uncomfortable with the topic. Right. And they're just trying to shut you up because they don't want to hear about it. They don't want to talk about it. They don't want to think about it because it makes them really uncomfortable. And in your reflection on page 219 in your book, you stated something that resonated very deeply with me. And I think this is the perfect place for us to talk about it. And that is, with the healing came my passion and my need to speak out. I began to understand my story could have an impact. Over the years, the same suggestion came from many of my friends. And I can so relate to that period where, there just is so much to unpack there. I mean, when you have a calling on your life to use something devastating in a way to bring healing to others, you can't shut up about it.
No.
You literally can't. You could
No.
try. You could try for 27 years. And God or the universe or whatever you want to call it is going to be like, no, there's work to be done here. There are other people who have dealt with this.
Well, the funny thing about that is I in the book, I talk about this too, but I actually hired a private investigator and found him 27 years later and confronted him. And in my mind, I thought, I'm going to meet this man, and for once and for all, I'm going to finally tell him, I get what you did to me. You had no right to do it. It was wrong. And once I did that, I'm done. I can move on. I'm done. And to your point, I just felt this need that I wasn't done. That was just the beginning of my healing in order to help others heal. And the Bible verse of God comforts us so that we may comfort others. I mean, there was a purpose in my pain, and I needed, and whether I helped 1, 100, 1,000 people, I'll never know. But all I know is that by telling my story and talking about this not only helps victims, but I'm hoping that it will shed light on clergy abuse and what it is. And it's not just a moral fall. It's not just a man who sinned, or it's not someone who just had an affair. It's not an affair. It's sexual misconduct, and it's a professional violation. It's not just a moral violation. They broke the ethics of their profession, and they are to be removed. They've lost that privilege of ministry by their own actions. A psychiatrist, any professional having sex with anyone under his care loses his license.
Yeah.
And that should be true with clergy, and it's not. We're not there yet. There are only 13 states where a clergy person counseling someone in his care, if caught having sex with that person, loses his clergy license. Only 13 states. So any other state, it's considered consensual. Now, of course, if it's a minor, that's a different story. But a teenage girl or someone who's 18, an adult woman, they can legally have sex with the person they're counseling without any consequences. And that's not true. Any other profession, that's not true. And
that's crazy.
It is crazy, but that's the truth. 13 states.
Wow. I did not know that.
Yeah. And so we need to, so I think that's where churches fail in a lot of ways. They fail. But one of the ways they fail is to see it only as a moral obligation of failure, that we all sin and fall short of the glory of God. We shouldn't judge. And God forgave you, so you should forgive him. They see that, but the other side is the moral side of it, the professional side of it. They took an oath, and they have broken the ethics of their profession, just like a stockbroker who does inside trading, he loses his license. As a nurse, I'm going to lose my license if I am caught stealing narcotics. Doesn't mean I can't be forgiven. Doesn't mean that I'm a bad person all the way around, but it does mean by my own actions, I've lost that privilege in my profession. And it should be that way for clergy as well. And I want to reiterate, there are many, many pastors, and I know of several who are good, God-fearing people who are They stay within the boundaries of the profession, and they're good people. But we have to deal with the ones who are out there that aren't. And unfortunately, I think there are more of them than most people want to recognize.
Yeah, I think you're right. And you keep saying that it's more than a moral, it's also a professional failure, but it goes even deeper. I mean, it's spiritual abuse. And to me, that is somehow like this really deeper even layer than all of it, because emotional abuse, you can heal in therapy. Physical abuse, obviously the bruises fade and the memories fade over time, hopefully. But when you spiritually abuse someone, you alter the course of their life.
Yes.
I mean, there's just something so deep about that to me.
Well, it's one of the most sacred parts of our being. They touch the sacred part of our soul, and they take the most important aspect of our lives. It's not about, church attendance and taking communion. It's who we are. It's who we see ourselves spiritually. And when that is damaged, it takes away part of our soul. And it then requires us to figure out who we are spiritually. And we have to navigate through all of that, like you say, to unpack it all. And so I agree. It spiritually, that's what makes clergy abuse so much more insidious, in the sense that, if I need help, I can't go to my church any longer. Where do I turn when the pain and the hurt has occurred in the church?
Yeah.
Are you getting the support you need as you divorce or face the possibility of divorce? Did you know that for just $55 a month, you can be a part of a 1-hour weekly support group call of people just like you? Some haven't even filed yet, but they know the marriage is not sustainable or healthy. Some were served papers they didn't want. Others are feeling empowered that they finally took the reins of their life and hired an attorney and a divorce coach to help them navigate the uncertain waters of divorce. All of them are facing fear, grief, loss, confusion, and pain, and they're finding help and hope in a Starting Over Stronger support group. You can get registered today for a group at startingoverstronger.com/groups and start this week in getting the help you need to divorce well and then live well. Remember, divorce is hard. Life after doesn't have to be, but the support you get now is what makes the difference.
Do you have any resources that helped you, books that you've read or leaders that you follow on the subject of spiritual abuse?
Well, you quoted Diane Langberg. She is absolutely excellent. She is spot on with so many of her writings and her speeches. You can Google her and find her on YouTube. So her name is Diane Langberg. I also, Marie Fortune, she wrote a book called Is Nothing Sacred. I have a bibliography in the back of my book, but that's one of them. She wrote a book about a minister who was having multiple sex with several of the women in the church at the same time. It's an excellent book. And then she talks about, the grooming, the manipulation, the gaslighting. The other book is called From Victim to Survivor, and that is a book of short stories of each victim's story of abuse.
Okay.
So those are all on Amazon. My book is also on Amazon. And then part of the other reason I wrote the book, as I said earlier, I wanted to educate people on clergy abuse. I want people to understand how grooming and manipulation and gaslighting works, and that these men and sometimes women are manipulative and they're not to be trusted. And, they're very good at grooming and manipulating an entire congregation so that when they are caught, they have a way of fooling those same congregants into believing that they didn't mean it and they're sorry and that, they'll never do it again.
Yeah.
Interestingly enough, my abuser was also accused of having inappropriate relationships with a young teenager in his first church prior to coming to our church. And our elders knew it when they hired him.
Oh, wow.
And they didn't let anyone know in the congregation. He was confronted. He's promised he'd never do it again, said he was sorry. And within 6 months, he was kissing me in my hallway.
Yeah. Wow. Well, it's really, it's mind control and,
It is.
Coercive persuasion, thought reform, you name
it. Brainwashing. It's brainwashing.
Yeah, absolutely. And interestingly enough, I actually just recorded an episode for my show on gaslighting and breaking it down, what it is, because I get asked that a lot. And I will say there were 2 books, and in my situation, because it was less of a sexual nature, I think the books that I'm going to mention are more aimed at somebody who maybe come out of a cult or a cult-like experience. I was involved in a small legalistic Baptist church that the pastor was a charismatic leader that, was very capable and able to persuade many, many, many people to his way of thinking and twisting the word of God. And I was there for 5 years, and it was the most mind-altering 5 years of my life. I knew from before I ever even went that there was something wrong there. My former husband insisted we go, and I didn't want to go, but eventually almost got in. I did get indoctrinated into it, and then had to fight my way back out of it. But 2 very, very important books that helped me during that time of recovery after that was The Subtle Power of Spiritual Abuse.
I read that book. I love that book.
That's right. And written by David Johnson and Jeff Van Vonderen. And then the other one, I would say even more so, was called Toxic Faith, Experiencing Healing from Painful Spiritual Abuse. And it is written by Stephen Arterburn and Jack Felton. Unbelievable. I read that book and I was just like, oh my gosh, these people were in that little small legalistic Baptist church with me because they just described all these little nuances that how could they have known, and it's like, it's crazy to me.
Didn't you find that by educating yourself and learning those things, that was the start of your opening up and healing? Because that's what's
so empowering.
Was all of a sudden I'm learning what was these terms, and I'm seeing these examples, and I'm thinking that's exactly what happened to me. And so it was so freeing to be able to see and hear someone describe exactly what was being done to me. I agree.
Yeah. It's crazy to me. Most of my work in divorce is with women who are leaving toxic or abusive situations. They're married to narcissistic, controlling, manipulative people. And I say to them all the time, it is as if there is a textbook out there somewhere on how to be a narcissist, because they all do the same damn things.
They do.
It's crazy. It's just insane how scripted it all is, and yet how blind we are to it when we're in the middle of it, and how difficult it is to fight our way out of it, and even to understand it, so yeah, wow, that's
and I don't
crazy.
think people understand, once you are so trapped in this relationship, how difficult it is to get out. And I tell people, just because there is a way out doesn't mean you see that way out. And because people would say, well, couldn't you have told someone? I said, no. For me, there was no one to tell. And of course, like I said, with him reminding me that I couldn't tell anyone and it had to be our secret. And I think too, this might be hard for some people to understand, but victims also want to protect their abusers sometimes. And in many ways, I wanted to protect him because, he was someone that I cared about. And everyone in this church loved him. So I saw it as, I'm the one that must have something wrong with me because I can't make him happy. Or if there's a problem in this relationship, it's because of me. And he clearly would just make sure I understood that, because many times he would say to me, I'm not happy because you don't know how to love me.
People question how you stay, why you stay, that's a common thing that people do. And how do you deal with that? What do you say to them?
Well, I go back to the point of how vulnerable I was. And like you said, the techniques and the tools they use are very textbook. And so once I was in, you just don't see a way out. And I think the thought of the fear of leaving and what would happen was more of a deterrent than what if I just stayed and just accepted it. And once you accept a relationship, and once you accept you're being physically or emotionally abused, once you accept it, you stop trying to find a way out. You stop trying. You just say, this is my life and I will make the best of it.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a couple of things that came to mind as you were talking. One was, I often say you can't see red flags when you're wearing rose-colored glasses.
Yeah, that's very true.
And the other thing is that when you're a very empathic person, you see the good in everyone, and you truly believe that everyone wants what's best in any given situation, wants what's best for you, wants what's best, what's right, what's moral, what's just. And so if whatever you're experiencing doesn't match that, then you rationalize in your mind that they're just struggling and we just need to stick it out and make it, and we'll fix it somehow.
And they also know that when they push you to the brink, they will give you a carrot to hang out there and start to be that kind person that you once knew in the beginning, and bring you back in and suck you back in. And then you think, oh, I feel bad that I thought this about him. And yes, he is a nice person and he is kind to me. I would never say that he was ever loving to me, but when he knew that I was at the edge and I couldn't do this anymore, he would come back to how much he cared for me and how much he'd been helping me. And, he played the guilt thing. And, another thing about staying is Susan Forward uses the acronym FOG, F-O-G, and she say victims stay out of fear, obligation, and guilt. And those three things are so powerful in a victim's psychic and in their mind that fear, obligation, and guilt keep us in the relationship.
Yeah. And it's a perfect analogy because it truly is a fog that you can't see out of. You can't see your way out of. You don't know how to get out of it. It's so easy for somebody that's never been in it to say, why didn't you just leave?
Right.
And it's honestly one of the most painful and dismissive things that you can say to someone who has been or is still stuck in a situation of abuse. So thank you so much for bringing that up, because I think that's a really important point. I thought it was interesting, and I'll kind of close this out on this and then let you share whatever else you might like to. But you mentioned in your reflection on page 219 that you found it very comfortable to talk with large crowds of people and see their faces as you spoke and shared your story. But you struggled with writing a book that seemed scarier to you. And it's interesting to me because I'm the exact opposite. I am working on writing my book, and I'm being asked to speak, and it just makes me crazy nervous every single time. Why do you think you found it easier to speak in front of crowds? I mean, that's like what the number one fear of humans.
Yeah. Well, like I said, I was always active in the church and up in front of the church at times. So I started at an early age that I felt very comfortable in front of groups and in front of crowds. I was always a leader and leading the songs or whatever. So I think I've always been that way. But the other thing was, it's one thing to stand in front of a group, as I said earlier, to say I was sexually abused. It's another to say and write it in detail that this man took me into his office and bent me over his desk and had sex with me. Even saying that now is a little uncomfortable.
Right.
So, to write it down and know that people were going to read this made it a little more uncomfortable for me. And the other thing was, writing the book forced me to really relive every single moment. That was unlike when I speak, I'm kind of doing a generic and I talk about it, but having to write that book and recall sitting in the pew and watching him preach and hearing his voice again, all of those things while I was writing it were very, very difficult. I wrote every chapter in the book except for one. I had an old tape of a sermon. It was on marriage and the sanctity of marriage. And it was a cassette tape. And I hadn't listened to it since I last heard it. I had an old cassette player and I put it in because I wanted to write a chapter on that. Mm-hmm. And I listened to his voice and I just couldn't do it. I could not. So I stopped the tape about 2 minutes into the sermon, and I gave it to a friend of mine who was also a writer. I shouldn't say also a writer, she wrote. And she listened to it, and I told her what I wanted to get from that chapter. It's called By Your Fruits You Shall Know Them. That's the chapter in the book. And she actually wrote that chapter. I kind of tweaked it, but that was the only chapter I couldn't write. I couldn't do it. The rest, some of them were difficult to write. I think someone described my book in a very good way. One woman said to me, I read your book, and the first part of the book, all I could do was think of that poor girl. And then I got to part 2, and all I could think of was, you go, girl. You go, girl. And that's
okay. I need to get to part 2.
Yeah, that's how I saw the book. That there's the abuse, and then there's the hope and the healing.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting that you're saying this. As I'm writing my book, I have hit that point where I don't want to write this particular section that I'm working on because I don't want to relive it. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I have an editor, and I've been talking with him about it, and he's like, you just have to keep writing.
Yeah.
And I'm
like, you will find, I
don't want to.
Yeah, I get that. You will find, at least I hope you will. And I did. There is, again, power of putting your voice to that page, and there's power of letting it go. And as difficult as it is, and believe me, I do understand that. I can breathe now. I can breathe. It's out there. It's written, and I'm glad. Truth is powerful, and we need to tell our truth. And our stories are important. Your story is so vital, important to others. And just as mine is or anyone else's, they all may be different. They might be similar in some ways, but each of us have a unique story to tell, and we need to tell our stories.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, how long did it take you to write your book?
Well, it took me a total of 2 years. I thought I was done after a year. And then I gave it to my beta readers, and I gave it to some editors, and they said, nope, you need to go back and redo some of these things and rewrite a few things. So it took me a total of 2 years. Okay. And I would say to anyone writing a book, I was very open to criticism. In fact, I welcomed it because I knew 2 things. I wasn't actually a writer per se. I have jokingly said my English teacher is turning over in her grave at this point. I also knew that because it was a personal story that I needed a perspective from someone else from the outside to say, this doesn't sound right, or, I would write this differently if I were you.
Yeah.
And so I was very open to criticism, and that helped me rewrite and put it in words that needed to be said. But I will say there were 2 parts in the book, or 2 sentences that I had several people say I would change that. And I didn't want to change it, and I didn't change it. So it's still your story to tell, the way you want to tell it. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm so glad you did. And I'm so glad I met you somehow on Facebook?
I think it was Podmatch. Was it Podmatch?
Podmatch. Okay.
Yes.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I lose track of where I've met
I know.
people
I
anymore.
understand that. Yeah. Yeah. We'll give them a plug. Podmatch.
Yes. Podmatch. Good place. And I have met several good people there that I am so glad to have met. So thank you for being on my show. Thank you for sharing your story. What would you say to the listener today in closing who has been wounded in any way by someone in a church?
First, I would say, again, it's not your fault. You need to understand that, and you need to believe it. It took me a long time to come to that point. Secondly, I would say, learn all you can about gaslighting, manipulation, all those things that were done to you. And then thirdly, I would say, you need to tell someone. And if you and I say that from someone who's took 27 years to say it. I would probably caution you not to tell someone in the church. Talk to someone outside of the church. I think that's important. Those people, and I don't mean it like that is necessary, but people within the church are going to be vested in what happens. And they're going to have a personal relationship with this pastor or priest or rabbi, whoever it is, choir director. And so it's going to be difficult for them to have a perspective. So if you're going to tell someone, and I highly say that your healing begins by telling your truth, seek someone outside of the church.
But start with a safe place.
And healing and hope is possible. It doesn't always look like it is, but it is.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you again so much. That's the exact message that I always want the guests to communicate to those listening here today, that there is help and hope for whatever you are facing. And so if something that we've shared here today has resonated with you, listeners, please pick up a copy of Sandy's book. Again, it is called Let Me Prey Upon You. And that is Prey, prey upon you as a predator does. And her name again is Sandy Kirkham. And so pick up a copy of her book today. I'm going to be diving into mine this weekend. I have some alone time, and so I'll be enjoying that. And any of the other books and resources that we mentioned here today, I will list in the show notes, so you can pick up those if you're struggling through this season of healing and recovery from any kind of abuse involving a church. And I hope that you get the help that you need there. And thank you again for joining us each week here on the Starting Over Stronger show. And we'll see you again next week for more help as you divorce and hope as you are starting over stronger.